All right, another podcast from the Michigan Institute of Athletics in Brighton, Michigan. It's going to be a stellar podcast today. Right before we get into it, I want to shout out VetLife. VetLife is a 501c3 nonprofit company. It's a company of veterans for veterans. Every veteran faces difficulties when they transition from active duty back to civilian life, and VetLife is there to ease that transition. If you'd like to reach out to VetLife, you can do so through Instagram or Facebook, or check out their website at vetlifetoday.org. So without further ado, I want to introduce Kate Melcher. Kate, for the people that don't know you, I actually want to take your story all the way to the beginning. You know, were you born and raised here in Michigan? I want to kind of know what you were like as a young woman, and then we'll start to create today's story.
Okay, going in the Wayback Machine. I was born and raised here in Michigan. I'm a graduate of Saline High School, which is right outside Ann Arbor. As a kid, you know, my brother and I were the only kids in the neighborhood for years, so we were sort of raised by adults in our early years, and I think that's kind of created an old soul in me. I've always been very curious and interested in what's going on in the world around me, eager to learn new things, tended to be one of the smarter kids in the class, which has its blessings and curses both. But I had the amazing fortune of going to public school in Saline. It's a nationally ranked school system, and they really fostered curiosity. You know, we played with simple machines in third grade, and we had teachers that invested in each of us individually. It wasn't read this, take this quiz, take this test. It was, if you want to learn how local politics work, go volunteer for a campaign. You know, Senator so-and-so is going to have a town hall or a coffee. Let's sign a permission slip and we'll go as a class. It was a hands-on way to enter the community, to matriculate from high school, not just as a graduate going to college, but as a graduate who's meant to be an upstanding citizen, ready to contribute.
So would you say that helped you find confidence at a young age? Because it sounds like you were in a great environment and you were probably being shown that life can be pretty awesome. There's a million opportunities out there. There's a bunch of different paths. You want to find the one that's best for you or the one that resonates with you. Do you think that you had an idea of direction at a young age, or was the experience across a wide variety of things, just eye-opening and you're like, hey, I can do a lot of different things, so I'm going to find what I want?
I was encouraged to do whatever I wanted. I was raised by a feminist mother who said girls can do anything that boys can do. The laws are going away. Every year there's a law that falls off the books that impedes women from doing anything that men can do. Today there are literally none. I had a grandmother who was doting but slightly cynical. So I would call her for advice and, oh dear, life's not fair. Life is hard. What are you going to do about it? And we'd have these conversations about what's the next step. Life is going to be a challenge, and it was sort of, like improv.
Yeah,
yes,
that's like tough love. I'm not going to baby you in your complaints or the things that you're not happy about. And life isn't fair. We're all born with different genetic gifts. We're born with different backgrounds. But it doesn't mean you can't make this life into something incredible. And a lot of people, I think, when they start to look at disadvantages that they're at, they actually disempower themselves because they go, oh, well, I can't do this because of that. If you could just get rid of that statement and be like, I'm a human being, that if I put my time and effort in, I can absolutely accomplish what I want to accomplish. Sounds like you found that at an earlier age and you had a good support system.
One of my favorite teachers was Don DePaulo. And anyone who went to Saline High School in the 80s or 90s knows him. He was the tennis coach and super involved. He taught sociology and government, and he was the one that said, "Oh, there's now a proficiency test that every student in Michigan has to take before they can graduate." And we were going to be this guinea pig class for this. And our class had some misgivings about it. We wondered what the standards were, why they were applied. We had all of these questions, and he empowered us to say, "Look, you are the ones directly impacted, and you have these questions. Let's go ask them." So he took us to Lansing, and we got the opportunity to ask our legislators about where did this law come from, where did these standards come from, what happens if we don't meet the standard, what if some of our classmates learn differently and test taking is going to be an impediment for the rest of their lives because we are all in this cookie cutter system now. I wanted that model for future students of mine, so. I was empowered to do that. I actually went to undergrad, and it wasn't my first choice. I went to undergrad at the University of Arizona. I thought, nobody's going to care where I go to undergrad. I want to go experience Greek life. I want to experience college. They were national champions for basketball. I was a huge basketball fan at the time. I wanted to really explore and enjoy life. And I didn't want to get an education degree. I knew I wanted government. So I did my undergrad in political. I said, I'll go back for the teaching certificate later. But the truth of the matter is, I thought, I don't have any business teaching high school government unless I've actually worked for the government. I need hands-on experience. I want to be able to say, oh no, I was actually there and this is how it works. This is what the textbook says, but this is reality. So when I was graduating from the University of Arizona, I peppered Washington, D.C. with resumes. I just, this was, early internet. So, I wasn't applying on Indeed or Monster or anything else that you could do now. There was a book. It was a tome. It was this Barron's book of internships. I flipped through and sent resume. Gosh, I must have sent 100 resumes. And the job I got absolutely launched my career and everything that I've been able to do since. I got an internship with the Chief Justice at the Supreme Court of the United States. I worked for Chief Justice Rehnquist in 2000, 2001.
See, I love sitting down for these podcasts and not knowing anything about the guest that I'm about to interview because that's unbelievable. Now my brain has so many questions and I'm so intrigued by your story. But it sounds like you had such an amazing pillar for the success in your future from your early childhood education, from your environment, from these very inspirational teachers that went above and beyond. That's not a teacher doing the bare minimum. That is a teacher going, how can I really prepare these students for life? And you were already asking the most important questions. Well, what about these students that may not learn the same way as me? So this might fit me perfectly, but I care about these people too. You're looking at it from a humanity viewpoint as a child. That's really, really impressive. So one of the things I think that anyone listening to this podcast would want to know is when you learn something from a textbook or you learn something idealistically, like, okay, the way this should work is this. The way things should happen is this. A lot of times when you go out in the real world, you find out there's a disconnect there, and for whatever reason that is. What were the biggest disconnects? Because I'm picturing this young Kate that comes out of college ready to take on the world. You were like, I don't know which one wants me, but one of these people want to hire me because you had the self-confidence that was instilled in you from a young age. So when you actually got into D.C., and you're probably going there with, like, okay, it's time to change things now, where are the disconnects? Because most people outside of politics, we're all frustrated. Everybody's frustrated. Right. Because almost every good human being on any side of the argument, if you're a good human being, whether you're left, right, indifferent, whatever, you kind of want the same goals. But a lot of the times that we don't get there. There's this constant progress that feels like you're in a mouse wheel, right? Like, why is that? Where were the biggest disconnects that you witnessed? And like, you just explain to me that transition, because you're coming out, you're probably full of, life. You're the college student. You got accepted. You've got to be on top of the world. What was it like when you got to DC, and where's the breakdown?
So I'll say a couple of things just as a precursor. The biggest disconnect when I left Saline High School and went to college, I didn't really realize and process until years later. I actually came back to Michigan after I'd been gone 20 years, and we'll talk about the rest of my career, but, I was looking to sort of, dial down my professional life and dial up my family life. I needed to make sure that my family in Michigan still knew who I was and still liked me. And, I wanted to be present where my siblings were here
Back to your roots. I mean, it does matter. Yes. That's your family forever.
Yes. So when I came back here, I wanted to do something a little bit different. And I actually applied for a job in Saline area schools. And I was interviewing with the superintendent, and he said, can you tell me what about your experience at Saline has most impacted your life? And I said, if I'm really honest, being prepared at Saline area school set me up for a lifetime of disappointment. And he said, what are you talking about? He said, we're the best at that. And I said, no, just hear me out, because I know you don't understand based on this response. I was disappointed when I got to University of Arizona and realized that most students couldn't write complete sentences, that most students didn't have the preparation in critical thought that we were taught at Saline. Nobody else knew Bloom's taxonomy and the different levels of learning that we learned in Mrs. Kruger's class in second grade, and color-coded to make it appropriate for second graders. But I found that nobody else was taught how to learn. they were taught information, and so it's just I I I I have often been disappointed, no matter where I live, no matter where I'm working, that I was given advantages that I expected everybody had. I didn't know better. All I knew is what I knew at Saline, and so I've been disappointed that others don't have those advantages, and so I've turned that into what's become a life of public service.
I understand 100% what you were saying. And the funny thing is, right when you said I'm disappointed, my brain went to that. I said, because you probably realize that you have certain things that other people don't have, and it doesn't put it on a level playing field. And
Right.
now all of a sudden, how do you make progress and, have deep, difficult conflict and dialogue, like constructive dialogue, that move things in the right direction if you're not operating on the same frequency? You know what I mean? Like, if we're on a different mental software, how do we exchange ideas and move things in the right direction? I knew exactly what you meant. But with that being said, I guess the obvious question is like, well, why is it not that way everywhere? But you have a couple examples of real leadership and real passionate teachers and people that you were fortunate enough to have, whether that is in the culture of Saline, in the way that they hire people, in the standards that they hold, in personal responsibility from the teachers, because that teacher has to be invested. You could put a teacher in the Saline schools that was not really invested in the kids, that's not very passionate, that doesn't really care about what they're doing, and they could be a terrible leader. They could influence the culture very negatively, right? So you were fortunate. The obvious question asked, why don't we have that everywhere? But how do you get elite level human beings all over the place? Because that is what creates that. Like, the ultimate method of learning, in my opinion, is almost like back to Socrates. It's like one-on-one, asking questions, finding out how you think, why you think what you think, and then breaking that down and then analyzing the thoughts and basing it in information and not opinion, and knowing that, like, when I'm wrong, I should admit that I was
Right.
not accurate. You know what I mean? And then reforming my ideas instead of like,
it is okay to think again.
yes.
It's encouraged.
But most people, they go,
Growth.
this is my identity, and if you challenge what I believe, you're challenging me. It's like, no, you are not your opinions. Those are your opinions. And if they're not backed by much, you should quickly reevaluate them. But so I guess I'm giving you a very broad question, because I know that what my audience would want me to ask is, why is that not everywhere? But really, you had some magic people in your life. How do we create more of those magic people to then disperse them everywhere, right? Because maybe if we took all the kids from areas that are not getting that education, we put them in the Saline schools, they would have a completely different future. So it's a very broad question. But what do you think we have to do as a society to change that?
The short answer is I don't know. The more thoughtful answer is I think our values have changed as a society. I think you have to value education first and foremost if you want to make this type of systemic change. If you place value, and not just monetary value, but the value of time, the value of talent, the value of professional status, the just a teacher, the making $20,000 right out of undergrad as a first year teacher, all of these just. There's empirical data that says that we do not value educators in this country. I thought we used to, and I lived in a community that did. I was educated by master's prepared educators with decades of experience and a heart to stay beyond the 8-hour school day. They were coaches, they were class advisors, they invested in us. They would stay after school to talk if we didn't understand that M equals slope. Miss Jonick would be there before she went to teach aerobics. They were an integral part of our lives.
I think you just hit the nail so on the head when you said our standards and morals as a society have changed. Because at the end of the day, you need elite people. When I use the word elite, I mean just like people with integrity, people that care, people that are going to go all in, people that have compassion for others, like good human beings, right? You need those type of people to be able to create the cultures in all of these satellite locations to actually build the next generation for success. But if the moral code or the standards of society keep slipping and slipping and slipping and slipping, then you're going to have lower level people teaching. And when I say lower level, like, I don't mean these things as derogatory as they sound, but there are low caliber people that don't have a lot of integrity, that don't really give their best, and they could have been shaped that way by life. I'm not saying that it's even necessarily their fault. You know what I mean? A lot of the struggling youth I work with in the community, honestly, it's because of the parents. And they're like, I don't know why my kid's fucking up. I have no idea. And I'm like, I've got a couple ideas, but people don't take a lot of personal responsibility. So when you have kids that are growing up in really broken homes, in really terrible areas, and all these things, and all of a sudden, guess what? The teachers that are in that area are those same broken children that grow up and they ended up getting hired back to teach at the school. We almost need a systemic, as you called it, change across society to say, guys, what matters? How do we make good people? You know what I mean? I remember I don't know. I kind of live in a fantasy world in the way that like I always want things can be better than they are. And I always push to the limit on that. But why would we not have a society where teachers are one of the most sought after roles, where it is one of the most desirable positions? A teacher should be paid like a doctor, but we should be incredibly selective. It should be incredibly difficult to become a teacher. You are going to shape the future leaders and people of this country. A lot of the teachers that I know that I went to school with, I'm like, they're a teacher now? Oh my God. These are people that like, I don't know if they have a single critical thought to them and they were blackout drunk every weekend. They're teaching your children. So as a society, we can make these changes, but we have to almost demand it. And how do you make those type of changes? Do you just get school boards across the country with parents saying, we want better for our children? We will not send our children to a public education where teachers are going to give 10% of what they should. And, look at the results. Look at society. Look at the characteristics among people.
I feel like this could spin out into a completely separate conversation because some of the parents that are going to the school board don't really know what they're saying either. So I mean, it's
100%.
It's a self-licking ice cream cone. And honestly, this is a conversation you should be having with my mother. So my mother is a master's prepared educator. She's been working in special education for decades. In the last decade of her life, she's been the principal of the alternative high school at Saline. So these students that aren't successful in a regular ed classroom for a whole host of reasons, whether they're court involved or there was a pregnancy or they're an Olympic athlete and they need a seat time waiver, for whatever reason, a regular classroom isn't working for them. She's creating a curriculum to help them succeed. And one of the pieces of the curriculum is service learning. Every trimester, they have a unit where they have to do something of value for their community, whether it's reading with folks at the old folks home or learning how to knit so they can make preemie caps for the NICU, volunteering for Fisher House, whatever it is, there is something that is baked into their high school education that's helping them launch into the next phase of their lives.
That is so brilliant because when you realize you're a part of a whole or like your effort matters to the community that you serve and the people you serve, and you're like, your life matters and the way you live matters, the way you speak matters. When you view yourself from a bigger standpoint, like some people do it through religion, like they tie it to a much bigger purpose. Some people do it through service to their community. There's military people get on board to the brotherhood and the sisterhood that are people around them. Like, these people depend on me. Sure. If I'm not my best, I am failing them, not just myself. Like sometimes, I would say most times, it's easier to step up for other people than it is for ourselves. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? When you know people depend on you. That's a brilliant thing. Get people out in the world and show them that, like, you matter. Your actions matter. And you know what? When you fill other people's cup of happiness in life, it actually fills yours. So that's that. It's beautiful to hear what your mother's doing. And like you said, we could probably go off on a tangent on this forever. And I want to kind of like narrow back into your story. Yeah. So then you get accepted to DC, and we haven't talked about your military service. Weren't you in the military?
I was. That comes a little later.
Okay, so that comes after. Okay, So you're in DC. You go there fired up. You want to make change. You're disappointed that everyone's not on the same frequency as you. What caused you to leave DC, or what were, like, if you have any powerful moments or lessons from that time of your life, let's talk about that. And let's make sure we talk about the military service.
So there's a couple of things, that disappointment that I was feeling, it waned a bit when I got to DC, because all of a sudden I not only did I have a purpose, but I was there with people that were way smarter than me, people that had all kinds of crazy experience.
I mean, you're next to the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States of America. It doesn't get much better than that. Like, when you said that, I sat across the table because I don't want to interrupt you much here, but I bought into the American dream to the fullest as a child. I believed in all of our ideals and our justice, and I studied the Constitution. I knew our amendments. I believed in, like, this beautiful idea that we have to work towards and we have to constantly get better. but I've been incredibly disappointed throughout my life at what it actually is versus what it is said to be. But you're there. You are in the spotlight, which was probably very empowering. Like, okay, now we're going to move this needle. Like I said, I don't want to interrupt you any further, but
no, it was wonderful. The court, believe it or not, was not the place where I thought I could take action. The court is where I thought I could go and learn, and that's what I did. But I do have to tell you that what you learn about the Supreme Court, and there's 9 justices, and you need this, and this is what oral argument is, and all those things. The court itself is a unique community and sort of time capsule. There are traditions in the Supreme Court that are just unimpeachable. Justices sit in the chair of the justice whose place they took, and that's not just on the bench, that's at the lunch table. When they have meals together, when they are in chambers, their chambers are assigned that way. Where they hang their cloaks in the cloakroom. There's all these things. And it seemed
why? Because
really,
that's so rigid, and that, you know what, that doesn't promote growth as people when we're that rigid. I should be able to sit and talk to you and sit by you if we communicate really well and we have phenomenal dialogue. Why is it so rigid?
The interesting thing, this is what I think. I don't know this, but from observation, that amount of rigidity on things that don't matter that much, it takes the brain processing power away from what chair am I going to sit in. I'm going to sit here and we're going to talk about real things. We're going to have the harder conversations. When there is order established as a baseline, there's way more room for the growth, for those interesting conversations. So definitely weird. It wasn't an environment that I was used to. It was far more rigid than anything I'd ever experienced. But it was part of it. In fact, the first day that I arrived, it was actually just as the Bush v. Gore case arrived, to sort of give you some timeline here. And when folks file amicus briefs, friend of the court, this is what we think and this is why. One of the other rigid things is that each of those briefs had to be delivered in 40 copies in 1-inch black binders. And that's because each of the justices needed a copy and each of their clerks needed a copy and the clerk of the court needed one. And at the time, the court didn't have internet. It was because the Ninth Circuit was reviewing a Napster case, and it was scheduled to come to the Supreme Court. And the Chief Justice said, I don't want to have the bias of having the internet. If we're going to be deliberating issues of the internet, I don't want to have that bias. So we had intranet, and we could talk to each other that way. But if we needed to do research, we had to go next door to the Library of Congress. We had to pull the books and work with the librarians and look at copies of the New York Times from 1865 to do research for the speeches that I was helping him write. It was a cool job.
That's amazing. You've witnessed some things that so few people on this planet will see. Like, that's the inner workings of this country's highest justice platform. That's amazing. Yeah, you have to value those moments.
Absolutely, I do. I mean, it was strange. It was edifying. It was, when we would get assigned, and we were interns. I had nothing to do with his jurisprudence. I mean, let me be very clear. There were people who hold Juris Doctorates who are at the top of their field, and they were the ones that were helping with that. I was looking at newspaper clippings, reading all of the newspapers to see if there were mentions of the Supreme Court or any of the cases that were coming up. And I was doing research and, drafting speeches that he would give a commencement speech in the spring, those kinds of things. But
do you have more or less faith in the system having been there?
I have more.
That is wonderful to hear. That literally means a lot to me, because from the outside perspective, you're always trying to figure things out. And I like to believe that there are good human beings fighting for people within these absolute top tier establishments. Mm-hmm. But I'm, for the first time, sitting across from a woman that says, I have more faith having been there than, going there and being disappointed.
Right. Now, I will say that the Washington of today is not the Washington that I grew up in. Arriving there in 2000 and then deciding to stay. So my internship with the Chief Justice was only 6 months, and I thought I was going to go back to Arizona and work on my teaching certificate and teach high school government. I thought, I'm not ready. I love this. What else? What's next? So I applied to 50 different Senate offices. I didn't apply to the House because apparently I'm a Senate snob.
You're like, there's so many
Sorry.
House of Representatives members. Come on.
Well,
We're
I
getting a
thought,
senator.
look, these senators are in office for 6 years. Congressmen and women are always running for office, and I don't like politics. I like legislating. I don't like politics. So if I'm going to have an opportunity to make a real difference, it's in legislating and not in politicking. That's me. So I applied to 50 of the 100 senators. At the time, the Senate was split exactly 50-50. And I got hired.
I want to talk about that for a second. So
Okay.
you were not like, I am left or I am right. You were a woman searching for truth and justice and learning the system and being passionate about it and saying, I want to see the inner workings of this legislation. I want to give my effort, my energy, my mind, my time. You weren't already on a team. You weren't sold that, like, I have to do this. I was fascinated by what you just said, because nowadays people are so on their team, even if they don't even know anything about the other team. They picked a team just like a football team, and they're like, when my team wins, I win. And if they lose, then I lose. You were just like, I'm going to be involved in this thing.
Yeah, I have a very purple resume.
I love that. I love that. If you saw out on the wall out there, I don't even know if you noticed, it literally is painted, "We are all one." Mm-hmm. And behind all the politics and the labels that you want to put on people are people, right? And there's good and bad,
Yep.
right? But you were just like, I need to be involved in this.
Right.
Please turn the next chapter. I'm excited.
Okay, so I worked for a Chief Justice who was appointed by a Republican, and then I was hired on to work for a Democratic senator. And that senator is the current occupant of the White House. So
You worked directly for Joe Biden.
I did.
Oh my God. I always say to people, because there's people, constantly trying to dog on this person and that person. Mm-hmm. I'm like, you don't know them. I said that to you before the podcast. Like, You don't know those people. They could be great people. You don't know. They might be bad. They might.
Right.
I'm sitting across from a woman that worked for Joe Biden.
Yes.
That is incredible.
Yep. And I started out at the front office answering phones, people calling from Delaware talking about what was on their hearts and what was concerning them, and got promoted pretty quickly.
Really quick, I don't want to interrupt you,
Yeah.
but did you ever have any direct interactions with Joe Biden? And what would you say, for as much as you can, about not him as a politician, not him as a senator, him as just a human being? That's all I care about. What would you say about the man?
Best boss I ever had, military or civilian, hands down.
That's amazing. So all the people that follow this podcast, that listen to this, that have such vicious, strong opinions, one way or another, because I have friends that think he's the greatest thing since sliced bread, and I have friends that think he is Satan incarnate, right? Mm-hmm. You have met him, known him, were treated fairly by him, watched his policy making, and as a human being, you're like, that guy was phenomenal to me.
Yep. I'll tell you two quick stories which I think demonstrate his character as much as developed me as a person and professionally. In May of 2001, Senator Jeffords switched parties, and all of a sudden the Democrats were in the majority. And what that means is now we have committee chairmanships, and we have to staff them. And when a party switches in the middle of the term, the infrastructure isn't really set up for that. And so folks get tossed in where they can to help, and all these kinds of things. And so all of a sudden he was the chairman of the drug caucus. And here I am. I had been promoted to the assistant to the chief of staff. I'm still really just a kid answering phones. But, it's like, all right, you need to learn these things. The COPS bill is coming up for reauthorization. It was his bill back from 1995, and there were some challenges from the Bush White House. And so my job, to crash on it for several days, is to see what the Republican objections were, what has changed, take a look at how the 1995 version of the bill had actually worked in reality versus what it was supposed to do, and what changes do we need to make in 2001. And I'm doing the best I can, because I just feel like I'm totally out of my depth, but I'm reading everything, and I put this briefing book together, and as you can imagine, a senator's schedule is pretty jammed packed, but this was going to be my first opportunity to brief the boss. And so I'm sitting in the ante room with his executive assistant Molly, and I'm watching the clock, and the vote is going to come any minute, and he's still in his office with the previous meeting, and I'm just basically sweating through the briefing book. My hands are so clammy. I'm nervous. I feel like I'm not equipped for this, and there are analog clocks in the Senate, and there are actually different colored lights that show when a vote starts and when so many minutes are left. And it looks like a doomsday clock. It's, oh my God, the vote is almost done. So they'd already called for the vote. I'm still sitting there, haven't had the opportunity to brief the boss at all. I'm going, Molly, I don't know what to do. He's going to miss the vote. He never misses a vote. Don't worry about it. Just, you might have to walk and talk, but he never misses a vote. This is his bill. He's not going to miss the vote. Just don't worry about it. You'll have the opportunity. Okay. So there's like 3-4 minutes before the vote is over. He comes flying out. He's like, Kate, let's go. So we're walking down the hall. This is the Russell Building, and this is everything you think Washington is. Really high ceilings and marble floors. And when you walk in high heels, there's a sound. Oh man, it makes
You're making me feel the moment,
right? And I mean, he's tall. He's got long legs, and he's fit. So he's walking at a clip. I'm in heels, trying to keep up with him. He's flipping through the briefing book, and he just kind of tosses it back at me. He goes, "Well, thanks, kid, but that didn't help me at all." And I went, ugh. I could have just melted in the floor. I was disappointed. I was embarrassed. I was just all of these things. And
what do you think he was searching for out of it? Because you obviously had expectations, and you probably thought you had met those expectations. What was he searching for, and where was the disconnect?
So I didn't get that in the moment, but what I got is he'd continued 3 steps after I'd stopped. He turned around, he looked at me, and he said, "Look, I've been in the Senate longer than you've been alive. This was an excellent first effort. I expect more, and I want to see you do it. Let's go vote."
I'm about that. So he flat out said, "You just got to step up. It's good, but it's not great. And you can be
great first effort. You can do better. That's why you're here."
Wow, that's fantastic.
Right?
That's fantastic. And then when you look back with a different lens in life, from a different point, you probably have completely different emotions. You have different feelings. You have different opinions on that situation at the time. Because at the time, you might have been so like, what? This was great. You came out with 3 minutes left. It's your fault. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But now you look at it through a different set of eyes.
Sure. He was developing the younger staff. He was developing us as leaders. He knew that we were going to be the next people sitting in those seats in the Senate, and he didn't want to accept something that was substandard. He said, "Look, I'm an elected official, and this is what I owe the people of Delaware. I owe them excellence, and you were hired because my staff saw it, but we're not there yet."
That's amazing.
So.
Good leadership demands the best out of other people.
Yep.
Good leadership doesn't really accept mediocrity. That's how we get to high levels.
Mm-hmm.
So that's an amazing story to hear.
Yeah.
So then how long were you in that office? And then what made you decide you wanted to change them? Because it sounds like you're living the dream. From the girl that you started as to what your ambitions were to where you are. You're working directly for a senator that you didn't know at the time, but becomes the future president of the United States of America. Right. He's been in the Senate his entire life, right? So you are living the dream. What makes that change?
9/11 was a part of it. So I was still working in his office on 9/11, and as a matter of fact, he was in Delaware coming down on the train, and I was back in Molly's office that I was telling you about before, and we had the Today Show on, and the first plane had hit, and then we saw the second plane, and she calls him up and she said, "Are you aware of what's going on?" And she fills him in, and he said, "Well, I'm still coming. This is bad. I don't know what it is, but I'm still coming." Well, we hear there's other planes, and as you look down the mall from our standpoint up on Capitol Hill, we thought the State Department had been hit. That's sort of in line to the Pentagon, and we didn't have good depth perception, and information was just kind of Capitol Police shouting in the hallways and let's evacuate, and all these crazy things. It was sort of mayhem in the buildings. So it becomes clear enough that we're under attack, and we're like, "Can you just stay in Delaware?" If they're bombing, we thought they were bombs. We didn't know. But if they're bombing Washington, we need to not have you die. And he said, "No, terrorists are not going to stop the legislative process. I'm coming. We're going to sit in session. This is what we're supposed to be doing. The terrorists win if we don't sit in session." So, we were trying to figure out an evacuation plan. And
how old were you when 9/11 took place? I was in 6th grade, but how old were you?
I just turned 20. No, I was 21.
Yeah, it was an incredibly vivid experience, right? Like you remember the exact moment, where you were, how you felt. Yeah, I can tell you the exact math class I was in, my teacher's name, because it was just such a defining moment of our lives.
Yep.
And it's almost weird to look back 20 years later.
Yeah, it's
Because
wild.
it's been 20 years since 9/11. I grew up in Philadelphia, by the way, so I was on the East Coast. I'd been to New York a million times. I had seen those buildings on the skyline so many times. It's almost eerie to not have them there. And I had been there and seen how incredibly grand and powerful, like the steel beams that make up that building, they were some of the most impressive structures on this planet.
Yeah.
For them to be demolished to rubble was unbelievable. So you're 21 years old. You're on top of the world. Yeah, I hadn't figured out age at that time. You're 21 in that position. I can't believe you're not our president right now, Kate.
No.
But with all this being said, 9/11 takes place, and it just changed you enough that you were like, I'm going to go a different direction, or did that come down the road?
It came down the road. So, the beauty of that day is, I'm sitting in the office with the chief of staff when we're trying to figure out what to do. And he said, look, you need to take everybody that you're responsible for, which at the time was the interns and the system administrator. Basically, the admin staff reported to me. He goes, you figure out a plan for them. My phone was where the Capitol Police were calling in. And my parents, I still don't think have forgiven me for this, but they kept calling, oh my God, Katie, get out. What are you doing? I was like, I love you. I'm fine. This is the only place that we're getting credible information is through this phone. I need you to not call this phone. I will call you when I'm safe. It's fine. I still don't think they've forgiven me for that. But so, we rushed out of the Russell building and we head over to my car, which was a 2001 Ford Escort. It was basically a pregnant roller skate. And we got 7 of us into it. And as we were rushing over to my car, apparently a CNN camera caught me, running across the Capitol grounds. And my dad goes, oh God, there she is. She's fine. She's fine. Everything is okay. I saw her on CNN. Everything's going to be fine. So we all, 7 of us, pile into this little car. And as we're driving out of town, people changed that day. There's a stereotype about the East Coast vibe, right? Where it's, very quick, very cold. And it was, hey, I got a van. I'm going to Woodbridge. Who needs to go? Yeah. Oh my gosh. I have bars on my cell phone. Who needs to call their wife? It solidified community in a way that we haven't seen since. Absolutely.
We were a country again. You were an American that day. I'll tell you that. No matter how different you thought people were for you, you were an American that day.
Yep. Yeah, and even as we were driving south, we're on 395. We're trying to get out. We decided that we were going to go to James Daly was our systems administrator, and he lived out in Springfield, and we were going to go to his house, and we would figure it out from there because nobody's coming for Springfield, Virginia. So we're trying to get out of town south, and we realized that no, it wasn't the State Department; it was the Pentagon. And the traffic was so bad that we just sat there on the 395 overpass, just watching the Pentagon burn and watching them try and pull people out. And it was surreal.
And you were still a child. I mean, you're not a child, but at 21, you're not an adult yet.
No.
Like, we don't know that until we're much older.
Right.
But like 25 Kate is completely different than 21 Kate. And 30
Right.
Kate is completely different than both of them. So it's like you're still trying to learn the world in real time. And you're experiencing one of the most devastating moments in history.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Thousands of Americans died.
Right.
And like you said, we were Americans for that brief moment in time. There was that beauty in that too, in the chaos, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what really sparks the change to the next chapter then?
I think that was actually a beginning of a hardening for me. That wasn't the terrorist attacked us. I need to raise my right hand and go to war. I still thought that I was in a place where I could make a difference. There was a series of events that I was in the middle of. I moved from working for Senator Biden to Senator Bill Nelson of Florida. And
why did you switch? If everything is really good, you love Biden's pushing you, he's the best boss you've ever had, why'd you leave?
I'm embarrassed to say the reality was pay.
No, that's okay. That's an honest. Authenticity is more important than anything else. You were like, I could get paid way better to go here, and really, then you get diversified.
Yep.
You get to learn from another person.
On a staff that's as old as Senator Biden's, the people that are really expert, the best staffers in the Senate are working for the best senators. And so there's not a whole lot of upward mobility. I didn't have a logical next step. But after September 11th, I was in a role where I got to learn continuity of operations and, what do we do if this happens again? And so I started learning more operational experience and management experience. And so I was hired on to be the ops manager in Senator Nelson's office. So it was a promotion for me. It was a bigger state going from Delaware to Florida. We had 7 state offices, and it was a fascinating experience. But it was also the office right next to Senator Daschle's office that got attacked with anthrax. So another
man, all kind of stuff's following you around, girl.
I know. Are you regretting having this conversation with me?
Not at all.
My first actual experience with the military was a Navy nurse, shoving swabs up my nose, which is very familiar to everybody now, but at the time it was, yeah. So anthrax, then I lived in the neighborhood with the DC sniper, and it was just and. I
remember that too. Got driving around, laying in the back of a truck bed, shooting people.
Right, and I'm zigzagging out of Safeway with my milk and bread. I'm what, and I'm still 22. So I didn't realize the impact that all of those things had on me until years and years later.
100%. Your fight or flight is cataloging all that, girl. It's stashing up all the stuff to be like, you should be paranoid 24/7.
Yeah.
And that leads to unhealthy behavior if you don't analyze it, recognize it, react to it. You know what I mean? Like when you just said those words, I was zigzagging while you were reacting more off your fears than off of even almost reality. Even though there is a sniper, the odds are it's unbelievably small, but it was drastically altering the course of your life because of that fear is there, right? And as a young kid, you're just like, no, I got to do this.
This is what you do.
This is how you live.
We got the safety briefing from the Capitol Police, and if you live in this, square city block area, this is what you need to do. Okay.
I'm doing it. I don't know. I'm right? Swerving. I'm telling you what, he ain't hitting me.
Yeah. So all of these things happen, right? But one of the real blessings is that when I was working for Senator Nelson, I crossed paths with a guy by the name of Bill Sudi. And Bill was a retired lieutenant colonel, and his last duty station was to be General Schwarzkopf's aide de camp. So he learned leadership from the best. And he would give me a hard time every day. He'd come into my office, probably mostly because I had a coffee pot in my office. He would come in and, we'd just shoot the breeze, and he'd say, "You ever think about being a military officer?" I'd go, "No, get out of my office. I'm some kid from Saline. I'm here. This is where the world changes. I'm in Washington. This is what I'm supposed to be doing. Why would you think that I should be a military officer?" And he just planting those seeds and cultivating.
One morning you wake up like, I should be a military officer. I have no idea where this came from.
Oh my gosh. Well, that moment actually came, I was hired on to be the operations director for Senator Mark Pryor. He was a new senator from Arkansas, and he needed somebody who was experienced to set up state offices and set up his Washington operation and all of this. And, oh, by the way, by now we're already at war in Afghanistan, and the war in Iraq had kicked off. I was in Nelson's office when that happened. So, the infamous briefing and S-407 and the yellow cake uranium and all of these things. He came back. He had been totally opposed to the war, and he came back and he said, I've seen the evidence. We're going to war. And okay. That didn't affect me as much as when I was working for Senator Pryor, and the 39th Infantry Division was the Arkansas National Guard infantry that was sent overseas, and trying to bring the reserve component into a 2-theater war when we hadn't done the work to make sure we had the trained personnel and the equipment. And this is when Iraq was the Wild West with soft-sided trucks and no up-armored Humvees and all of these horrible things that we sent our men and women in to do. Our office was drafting a whole lot of letters to Gold Star mothers. And I thought, okay, this is a bullshit way to spend the war. I'm done. So I called Bill Sudi and I said, all right, I'm in. I still loved what I was doing in the Senate. And so I didn't want to go active duty straight away. I wanted to find the reserve component opportunity. There was still a law against women in combat. There was still a law against women in combat arms, MOSs. I said, look, I thought that I could change the lives. I thought that I could change the world here in the Senate, and it's not happening. So tell me where I can make that difference for at least one other person. Show me how the military does it. And he said, Kate, it's not the Navy and it's not the Air Force, because you don't start changing big things in those two services until you make rank. But on day one in the Marine Corps, on day one in the United States Army, as a lieutenant, you are responsible for the lives of 40 men and women. You're a platoon leader. Your decisions will directly affect whether they live or die. You want to know how to change a life? Be a platoon leader. I said, all right. If I'm going to war, I want guns. How do I do that as a woman? Because the reality is, like women like Allison Jaslow, she was a loggy, right? She was responsible for convoys, which you'd think is totally safe. Hey, I'm just bringing goods and fuel and whatever. But in Iraq, she was in
IEDs. You ever
right?
hear of them? Yeah.
Yes. those were the targets.
100%.
So,
their supplies. They're like, if you can stop the people from getting their supplies, we can drastically weaken the forces. 100%.
Yes. So women were engaged in combat every day. And I didn't want that to be by accident. I wanted my engagements to be intentional. And so attack aviation was where it was at. So in the Marine Corps, it was Cobras, and in the Army, it was Apaches. And I was not taken seriously. There were 8 attack battalions in the Army Guard, and they all basically said, what? You're trying to go street to seat? They used very colorful words for saying that there are no women in attack aviation, which at the time Nicole Washington was already flying in Idaho. There were a dozen other women that were flying attack in the Army, but it wasn't ubiquitous. You didn't often find women in that role. But I figure if I'm going to war and people are shooting at me, I want to be able to shoot back. I love the mission of close air support because I wanted fewer letters to Gold Star mothers. And if I'm flying Overwatch and taking out the enemy so they can't take out my brothers, my sons, that's what I wanted.
War is a really hard thing, though, because that's someone else's brother and son. That's somebody else's mother. That's somebody else's daughter. And that's one of the things that I feel like haunt a lot of the military veterans after is if you really don't find a perfect reason for the things that are done, you're like, that is a Kate Melcher that thinks she's doing what is right from her perspective. Right. You know what I mean? And that's a wild thing. But there's not much more devastating than an Apache helicopter. You're absolutely right. That makes the difference. You call in close air support and the enemy is toast.
Right.
You know what I mean? You can't fight back at an Apache. There's not many ways to do so.
Yeah.
So you're in an incredibly important role. But all of a sudden now you see lives being taken firsthand. And in a way you're responsible for that. But you're doing it to protect the lives of the people you're there for. But there's a super interesting dynamic on how you have to be able to process that mentally. Did that change you?
So I will say a couple of things. Number one, I'm actually experiencing that cognitive dissonance right now looking at the footage in Ukraine because there's part of me that sees a 40-mile long Russian convoy in the open that's going, get me a 64. This is an easy solution. But, of course, the diplomat in me knows that that's absolutely playing with fire. And the human in me is seeing footage of Russian helicopters being shot down. And that hits. Yes, they're the enemy. Putin is a maniac. And everything he's doing is dangerous.
He's just a gangster that seized a country and does whatever he wants. He doesn't care.
Right.
There was a literal treaty that was like, hey, we'll give your country our nuclear weapons. You just can't invade us or try to take us over. And they're like, all right, cool. Putin's at office. He's like, I'm going to take you over now that you gave me all your nuclear weapons. He doesn't care.
Right.
So there are people like that. You know what I mean? And he rules with an iron fist. So it's an incredibly difficult situation. Yep. But the people of Russia aren't to be blamed.
Right.
You know what I mean? So it's really difficult. War is just an ugly, very hard thing. Yes. And the loss of human life is really difficult.
Yes. So the irony of all of this is, even though I had an experience as an enlisted soldier and got picked up for OCS and flight school and did all of the things and got my wings, I never flew in combat. The irony of my military career, and something that I struggled with for years, is that it felt unfinished.
Yeah, you dedicated all those years to make your difference and never had your chance to make your difference.
Right.
So that's a super hard thing to swallow.
So for a number of reasons, not least of which was, hey, that lieutenant used to work in the Senate. She knows how to talk to Congress. She'd be really good at briefing our general officers. And even though my progression as a junior officer would have been better served as, going on to be a platoon leader and getting RL progression and being proficient in my aircraft and deploying with my team and all of those things, that is what the career trajectory of a junior officer should be in Army aviation. Needs of the Army was super neat that you can fly Apaches, but we need you as a legislative liaison officer. So I spent a couple of years in a 05 billet, teaching generals how to talk to Congress. And that's not what I wanted.
And your heart wasn't in it. So all the I mean, it is to some degree, but that's not where your direction told you to go.
Right. So there was certainly disappointment. But I did find value there. I mentioned that up-armoring Humvees was something that hadn't happened. Well, I was part of the team that made that happen. We were able to get a supplemental appropriation to make certain that our men and women were better protected, and I'm super proud of that. I know that men and women are alive today because of that work that I got to do in the Pentagon. It's not what I wanted. It's not what I expected. It is, I ended up between active duty and the reserve spending 15 years in the military, and I, got out, resigned my commission as a captain just 2 years ago now. But
you can say I made a difference.
I know that people are alive because of what we did, and that's how I reconcile it. For a long time I had a hard time talking with combat vets because I served for 15 years during a 2-theater war and was never downrange. Well, what the hell? Was I a malingerer? Did I choose? There are things that people might assume. We were actually at a social function, and people were getting introduced around and whatever. And sometimes people like to introduce me by my resume, which I don't love. But in this case, it was important. She said blah 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 blah, and she was a badass Apache helicopter pilot. Well, this kid looked up and came to life. I mean, the entire time he looked like he was ready to just run screaming into the great abyss. But he heard that I flew Apaches, and he looked up, locked eyes, crossed the room, snatched me up, and gave me the biggest hug ever, and was just crying into my shoulder. I'm going, what the hell? What? And he said, I'm alive because of you. I said, brother, you are not alive because of me. I was never there. And he said, I don't know that I will ever have another chance to meet an Apache pilot, so I don't care if it wasn't your call sign. I don't care. You are every Apache pilot that I've ever met in my life. So shut the fuck up and let me hug you. So if I can represent my brothers that were doing the work, if I can accept that honor on their behalf, I'm okay.
Yeah, that's incredible. And the second you told me that story, I was like, but to him, you are that. Because even though it wasn't you, it was people like you that saved his life, that were incredibly crucial, that have impacted that man forever in such a deep way that you had that emotional experience. And to this day, I can see the emotion in your eyes because you felt the sense of that man felt such gratitude for people like you. That's the difference that you were supposed to make.
Right.
That was the difference that you had to make sure. Like, did I make a difference? Did I? Yes. And that was it. That was the universe revealing that to you, that what you do matters. So 15 years in, You've probably learned so much about the inner working of the military. You see what's good, you see the bad, you see it from the legislative side, you see the struggles and the disconnects between what Washington should do for the military and what, why there's not the cohesion better. When you decide it's time for me to leave, that's an extremely difficult transition for a lot of people. Like a lot of the veterans I've talked to on this podcast, they struggle, but you have such a fortified resume. You are confident in who you are. You know that you can kind of take on the world. Was it an easier transition for you? And did you have direction? When you were leaving, did you know this is what I'm going to do next?
When I came off active duty, it was actually years ago. It was back in 2012. And I actually went into aerospace engineering, and we were building the helicopters that folks are flying. I had both military and commercial. But while I was there, I was married at the time, and my husband was an infantry soldier, and he'd been back and forth overseas, I think, 6 times at this point. He went back again after we got divorced. But after that last tour in Afghanistan, he was injured. He needed some work done. And so he was part of 7th Special Forces Group, and because of BRAC, that whole group was moving from Fort Bragg in North Carolina down to an Air Force base at Fort Eglin, Eglin Air Force Base in Florida. So we'd been married about 4 years and lived together maybe 4 months of that, because the helicopter guys and the ground guys aren't necessarily stationed together, and he's deployed back and forth, and I'm in Washington. I mean, it's just the marriage was doomed for 1,000 reasons, but we were going to try and make it work. So I came off active duty and moved down to Eglin Air Force Base, which, honest to God, it's one team, one fight, but the Air Force has different acronyms. They speak a different language. I was no longer an Army captain. I was an Army spouse, and I was not good at that. My identity was totally gone, and he needed to have surgery. So, alpha female, Apache pilot, I'm in control of everything. When you're not in control, things fall apart. I had control of nothing, not least of which I couldn't be in there with the scalpel. So here I am alone and about to have a panic attack, just sitting in the waiting room. And I'm going, what?
Why do you think, I got a really interesting question. You might not even know the answer. You are so unbelievably capable. Your resume shows so much success. You are in places that less than 1% of all people will ever get to. But yet you are struggling psychologically with things that from certain standpoints, it's just beyond your control, and you don't need to control it. And it's okay not to control it. Like if you just control you and the best version of yourself towards the things you do, you're going to get the best results. But you're struggling mentally bad. Where do you think that comes from? Do you think from being such a high achiever that you develop certain qualities of like perfectionism, and anything that you can't have your hand on causes you stress? Or why does that take place? I'm fascinated by that. Usually it's in high level people. They have those struggles.
Yeah, I think the curse of perfectionism was a bit of it, although by that point in my life I'd started to grow out of it a little bit. I think the training of the most highly capable multifunctional aircraft in the Army lends to that. Every time you pull pitch, you're taking your life in your own hands. It's dangerous. It doesn't matter if you're in combat or not. The joke is helicopters don't fly; they beat the air into submission. That's real. There's an aerodynamic reason that they fly, but it takes human input constantly to ensure that happens. They call it task saturation when you're in an Apache, because you're not just flying. Flying is a thing that you happen to be doing while you're deploying a weapon system. The amount of input, the physical input where you're using all of your appendages to control the helicopter, the auditory input, right?
As I'm sitting here, you're so crucial in every aspect of what you're doing that it probably puts you in this heightened state where you're like always on red alert because a single mistake could cost you your life or other people's lives.
Yes.
You know what I mean? The same girl that was dodging the sniper, whether she was, you're in that state again. You're in the state of, oh my God, I cannot fail. This is so important. Everything has to be right.
Yep.
And a lot of times the universe doesn't allow that. You don't have a hand in certain things, and you have to accept that. And being able to let go of that type of control as a Apache pilot that worked for a senator, that's got to be an incredible, different challenge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when I talk to my veteran brothers and sisters, not many of them had that experience. I find more and more that my experience as an aviation officer is unique. I love the relationship that I have with my Apache brethren because we speak in a way that we understand each other, whether we were in combat or not. There's something about strapping on that aircraft and making it a part of you that you cannot understand until you've done it. But yes, I think that is part of why I was freaking out in a waiting room at the Eglin Hospital.
And I don't want to skip your story, but I want to ask you an important question. So how do you work on having a healthy psychology through all the experiences that you've gone through, where you've had to experience so much fight or flight, where your nervous system has probably been shot from times, you've been overworked, you've been mentally drained, you've put yourself in these high risk, high stress scenarios for so long. How do you work on having a very healthy psychology for your life? Because you have a lot of life outside of all the things that you've done. Mm-hmm. There's a lot more to life. How do you work on those things?
It's a number of different things. Primarily, my quote unquote meditation is knitting. I find that I struggle with meditation and just quieting into nothing. I have to have something going on. So the rhythm of knitting, the counting,
I gotta ask that. Why are you afraid of the silence? What would happen if you do not allow your body to go into, these are all coping mechanisms.
Sure.
These are all ways to, if I'm doing this and I'm in control of this knitting and I'm making this perfect loop and I'm keeping this rhythm, then everything's fine. Mm-hmm. If you weren't knitting, why is everything not fine?
It's just not productive.
You don't have to be productive 24/7. Sometimes you get to just breathe as a human being and exist and realize that your life is still beautiful and that the sun is still going to rise tomorrow and you can still go have a wonderful meal with someone you love. And you don't always need to be productive.
Yes, I have those moments and I've grown more into that. So, the real answer is, how do I cope with it? Aging. The maturation process in my late 30s and early 40s has brought me to a place where, let me just say this, I used to get frustrated with my dad. I was like, Dad, why are you not outraged all the time? Do you see the injustice? Do you see what's happening in Sudan? Do you see the world is on fire. How are you not constantly outraged? You're a good man. I know you care about this stuff. And he said, I do care about that. But I also know that I can be most effective in small spaces. He said, I know that when I volunteer at the hospital, when I'm pushing a wheelchair, helping this lady get to her surgery, that's helping her. That's giving her husband peace of mind because he was struggling to push her. Whatever it is.
Your father is a brilliant man. That's wisdom.
Yes.
That's wisdom.
That's what it is. That is what I feel like I'm evolving into. That is what has quieted life for me.
Are you religious at all?
No,
I'm not religious. I was just asking.
I was raised Catholic. I'm a recovering Catholic.
Yeah, recovering Catholic. I'm not religious in the tiniest fashion, but I've looked into a lot of the different religions. And one of the things that really resonated with me is kind of like in Buddhism, the idea of you don't have control over all these things that you wish you could. Mm-hmm. Even if I'm married to the woman of my dreams and I'm being the best version of myself, that woman could decide that she wants to be with someone else. That is beyond my control. Yep. I can try to be the best version of myself. If I make someone's day better today, I had an impact versus all of these struggles and things. I'm giving my energy away that could be used very vitally in my community, in my family, in my life, in my relationships.
Yep.
But instead, I am letting that energy get sapped out to things that are probably not being impacted by me being frustrated.
Right.
Versus if I just go out and I have the right energy for the world, I'm making a difference. Your father dropped some wisdom on you.
He did. And it's, your parents tell you all kinds of things and you're usually not ready to hear them. But so, I have a tremendous amount of respect for my father. He is the kind of man that you want to raise your sons to be. So I'm gonna set that down for now. But so I do want to get back to Eglin Air Force Base because that was the turning point that gets me to understand my father's advice and all these kinds of things. So I decided that I actually just need to go out and take a walk because I'm not gonna let these Air Force guys see me cry. It was a pride thing in the middle of panic, and I needed to breathe. And so I walked out of the hospital doors, and I saw the most beautiful federal building I've ever seen in my life. And I immediately copped this attitude, like, these Air Force guys get everything. What the hell? This is ridiculous. I'm like, is that a general's house? It's got to be a general's house. So I kind of walk closer, and I'm expecting to see stars on the lawn, general officers that they're, when you're on a military base, where the generals live, no stars. But there's a sign that says that it's the Zachary and Elizabeth Fisher House. I'm like, neat. What is this? And, so I'm not shy. I go and knock on the door. And this very pleasant woman with a super thick Southern accent answers the door. And I said, I don't mean to intrude. My husband's having surgery right now. I just needed a walk. And what is this place? I couldn't even finish the sentence. And she had totally snatched me up. And she goes, baby, this is the Fisher House, honey. You're home. What you need? I just made some coffee. You take cream or sugar. We can sit. We can cry. We can talk. I can leave you alone. We got Wi-Fi. I made coffee. How you take it, sweetheart? I'm going, I didn't know how to respond to that kind of that kindness,
that's just
compassion.
Love. That's compassion. That's not even knowing you, but just human being first.
Right. So I learned. I spent an hour in a Fisher House that day, and I didn't rate staying in a Fisher House, but I learned that these Fisher Houses were all over the world on military bases and near VA hospitals, specifically for people like me. I was an Army spouse. Military caregivers, children. We like to use the analogy that it's similar to a Ronald McDonald House, that, when your loved one is in the hospital, you want to be there with them. So Fisher Houses were built so that family members that had to travel to be with their loved one, they had a place to stay. They didn't have to worry about paying for lodging. The refrigerator is always full. The community brings in spaghetti dinners. It's a brick and mortar support system.
So I had never heard of it until I had just lightly researched you before this podcast. Mm-hmm. How did the Fisher Houses start? I mean, and it's a brilliant thing, especially because the military presents struggles that unless you were in the military, you just won't understand. And the more compassion and positive environment and training and things that will set you up for success after your military career or keep you sane during it are crucial. And we owe that to the people that are taking an oath to the nation. We owe that to them. So how are the Fisher House started, even if it's just a very brief synopsis? And then, did you start like, I got to be a part of this? As you felt that moment, you felt that experience, you said like, I need to be involved in this.
I didn't right away because I was still focused on how do I make this marriage work? How, I'm getting into engineering and, all of these things in the moment. Ultimately my marriage didn't survive, and I decided I needed to come back here to be with family. And when I was looking for a job up here, I saw that Fisher House was hiring. And I said, these folks don't know it, but this is my job.
Same with the senators, remember? They don't know it yet, but they're hiring me. I'm telling you right now. It's that young it's that same woman that was set up for success because, like, you have that bravery in yourself. You have confidence in yourself, and you say, this is where I'm going.
Yep.
That, really quick, there's something in that more people need to understand. Like, you can create the future that you want if you become the person that you should be. You know what I mean? So like, I know I have value. Right. And if I can make other people see that value, they're going to want me in their team. They're going to want me in their environment. So, like, that's a thing that I try to tell a lot of the young kids that want a beautiful story, that want to have these incredible moments. Like, be the person that deserves those moments. Be the person that knows you're worthy of those moments. And if you're in an environment that tells you you're not worthy, get out of the environment. You know what I mean? Because we all have that potential. So let's talk about, you see Fisher House in Michigan. How did you hear about the Michigan one?
I looked on Indeed.
There it is. We got the internet now.
Yep. Yeah, I was just looking for a job. But let me back up and tell you how Fisher Houses started. So it started with a guy by the name of Zachary Fisher. He and his brothers had a construction company in New York City, and so a lot of that skyline that you grew up looking at, Fisher Brothers Construction was a part of making that a reality. So the Fisher brothers were blessed in their lifetime, and Zach was actually injured in high school, and so he couldn't go to World War II. He was 4F. But he had all of these blessings and felt like he needed to give back, and he needed to serve in a way that he could. And so he and his wife, Elizabeth, who did serve, she was a USO girl during World War II. The two of them never had kids, but they sort of adapted the military. And, throughout their career, they were in the business of sharing their blessings with the people who need it most, with what they call our greatest national treasure, our men and women in uniform. So they'd been really involved in military causes for years. And back in 1990, they were visiting Walter Reed. They're at Bethesda, back when it was called Bethesda Naval Hospital. And Admiral Trost and his wife were giving a bit of a tour. And Mrs. Trost said to Elizabeth, I think I need to show you something. Like, this is the formal tour, but let's have a conversation over here. And it turns out that there were families that were living in their cars because their loved one was wounded, ill, or injured in the hospital, and they couldn't afford a hotel in D.C., but they weren't going to be anyplace else. And so Elizabeth said to Zach, "We're going to solve a problem." And of course he said, "Yes, dear." So he went to the Department of Defense and said, "Look, I'm a builder. I can get an architect. I want to build comfort homes near military hospitals so that you can get people out of their cars. That's what I want to do." And of course the government said, "Write us a check and we'll start building right away." And he said, nope. That is not how this is going to work. I want this to be a public-private partnership. I'm the builder. I can get an architect. I want to build to my standards. I don't want this to be a lowest bidder situation. I'm a man of means, and I want these folks to feel like they are guests in my home. So the Fisher Houses, they're not barracks buildings with fancy curtains. They are beautiful. I've had people describe them as 5-star hotels, but they are absolutely not hotels. They are homes. He used his own money to build the first 20 Fisher Houses. There's now 92 all over the world. The Fisher House here in Ann Arbor was number 87, but it didn't exist when I started working for Fisher House, Michigan. We were still trying to raise funds because every single Fisher House is built completely with private gifts and grants. We can't use state money or federal money or anything like that because that changes the bid process, the build process, the schedule, all of these kinds of things. So using private gifts and grants, we built this beautiful 16-suite home with common areas so that families can fellowship. They can make meals together. They can ask about how their loved one is doing, or I'm having this frustration with the VA, and how do you get to this benefit, and how do you it's like being at home for Christmas with your extended family. The commonality that we have as military members and family.
And what a beautiful thing to have in a healthy society. Mm-hmm. We shouldn't have people sleeping in their cars trying to see their loved ones. We shouldn't have that, especially people that were sacrificing their lives for the good of the country. Right. You shouldn't have that. So wow. The 87th one built. When did it go up here in Michigan?
It opened in June of 2020. And since then, that house has hosted nearly 2,500 families during a pandemic.
Unbelievable.
And among those families, we get all kinds of stories, right? So there's actually a leather-bound journal that's in every single one of the rooms where families can write their thoughts. And I'll share one verbatim with you, but the other one I want to share is actually from a Vietnam veteran. He was ambulatory, so he actually stayed in the Fisher House with his wife. And what he wrote is devastating and beautiful. He said, when I got back from Vietnam, I was proud of what I had done and what my platoon had done. I believed in what we were doing. And I realized as soon as I got back to the States that pride was inappropriate, that pride should be shame. And for 50 years, he didn't talk about his experience. He put his decorations in a drawer. He didn't even talk to his family about his experience in Vietnam. But he said, the second that I crossed the threshold of the Fisher House, I felt the honor and the gratitude that I know that I earned 50 years ago. Just this physical statement of, we so appreciate what you've done. You deserve this. This is for you. This is for your wife. This is what we meant to say and what we didn't say 50 years ago.
100%. Every Vietnam person talks about almost like the horror of the transition back and like how, just they were treated by the nation. And it was like you were supposed to be these heroes dying left and right for a cause that you didn't even fully know if you believed in or not. You were just doing your job for your brothers and sisters alongside you, right? And you came back and you're kind of abandoned by society. Yep. So to get that real feeling again and to feel worthy as a human being again, like, you know what I did was important and it did matter.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's magic.
It was healing. He was at the VA to heal physically, but this opened up the trauma of that experience to be able to heal 50 years of carrying that weight. And bless his heart, he had to come back for follow-on episodes of care, and he was wearing a Vietnam veteran ball cap the next time he came in. The pride was back. He joined the Legion. He started talking with his brothers about their experience in Vietnam. And where were you? And, I was in the Outrang Valley. I love hearing these guys talk to each other.
The only thing that's unfortunate now is that he had to carry that weight for 50 years. If we could make it a healthier transition back to society for military people to feel worthy, to feel like now they're meant to have a good life too, and they deserve happiness too, that right there is solving one of the biggest problems this country faces. I mean, military people, suicide rates are unbelievable. Right. Opiate addiction is unbelievable. Yeah. Alcoholism is unbelievable. But we need to get them to realize that, like, you have value. A lot of those things come down to the way you feel about yourself. For the decisions that you're going to make. This is beautiful to hear, very beautiful. But you said you have another story that you wanted to go verbatim.
I do. I love this so much. I mean, she's only written a half page here, but she says so much in this half page. This is a veteran spouse. And she says, "Thank you very much for allowing me to stay here. I didn't know when my husband was transferred to the VA hospital what I was going to do. I had a 175-mile one-way trip here and limited funds. A motel for one night was $100, and I simply couldn't afford it. I was thinking they might allow me to stay in his room, but they said no. One of the nurses told me about the Fisher House, and the social worker helped me by contacting you, and I had a place to go. I'm so amazed to find that it had everything you could need at no cost to us. This facility is amazing. You've made the stay feel like home and so very safe. I am ever so grateful for the care and thoughtful people who provided this to me. It's been a wonderful, pleasant stay, and I can never repay you for the kindness that has been shown to me in my time of need."
These people are going to remember this for the rest of their lives. You know that. Like, it's that important. They're going to remember that for the rest of their lives.
Absolutely. It goes beyond, veterans who are getting care for the first time because now that their spouses can come, their spouses are insisting. Folks that are staying for 8, 10, 12 weeks at a time for iterative care, they couldn't do that. We've had children doing Zoom classes from the kitchen so they can come and be with mom or dad and have surrogate grandparents that, mom has to be with dad in the hospital. So grandma who's living in the room next door is going to sit with you while you're doing your Zoom math class. There are real tangible things. And then there's this emotional family part of it that you just, it's hard to describe unless you hear directly from women like this.
So what is your role within the organization? And then what would you say your goals are for the Fisher House? And how do you get enough attention and drive towards a cause like this? Because this is a crucial aspect for society to have. And it's such a good thing to be able to tell military people up front, if by some chance you end up in this horrible situation, you're severely injured, we have established these across the nation so that your family will be able to be there with you. How do you drive enough attention to that? And what are your goals within the organization and your role?
So I'm the executive director of Fisher House, Michigan. There is Fisher House Foundation at the national level, and Let me explain the three-legged stool. So their leg is to actually do all of the construction. That's the foundation that Zachary Fisher started back in 1990. The VA is the second leg, or the military. I'm going to speak VA because that's what we have here in Michigan. Once that house is built and furnished and beautiful and even has silverware in the drawers and everything a family could need, that house is literally gifted to the VA. The keys are handed to the VA house manager, and I see that look on your face. I get that a lot because the VA doesn't get very good press. This is one of those places that a public-private partnership shouldn't work, but it does. And part of the agreement is, look, we're going to give you this nearly $10 million gift. And in return, you're going to staff it appropriately. You're going to use appropriated funds to do that. You're going to uphold the standards of everything we put here. We put really beautiful, soft, luscious sheets on this bed. If they get soiled or it's time to replace them, you've got to replace them at the same standard. You can't go with whatever in the GSA catalog. You are going to maintain the standard for the 10,000th family that comes through this door that the first family experienced. Fortunately, this is one of those programs that Congress loves because it works, and so they want to put more and more money in that line item every year. We have a wonderful advocate in Southeast Michigan, Representative Dingle, she's the Fisher House advocate in Congress. Her husband's name is on the VA Detroit building. It's the John D. Dingle VA Medical Center.
Yeah, they're an incredibly influential and powerful family in Detroit.
So she talks Fisher House every opportunity she can. So I'm a little bit off track. My job is to run this statewide organization that raises funds and awareness specifically for Fisher Houses in Michigan. So we don't do the construction locally. We don't run the house. The VA does that. But we ask people for the gift of gab, and we ask people to not only support capital for the build, but to support operational funding for all the things the VA can't provide. The VA can't stock those refrigerators. We can. If a dishwasher goes out on a Friday night, I can go to Lowe's and get a new one, or go through the months-long
No, it makes
procurement
perfect
process.
sense. Do we only have one Fisher House in Michigan?
There's currently only one, and it's at VA Ann Arbor. There's been a location approved for Detroit, so we are actively fundraising for that. Our statewide fundraising goal is to raise $20 million. We've raised just north of 10 so far. So we are actively asking people to get involved and to help us build to support VA Detroit, and to help us with everything from grocery gift cards to respite meals. We love being able to give a family, here's a gift card to Panera. Go get yourself a nice cup of coffee and just take a minute away, because caregiving is hard. We make sure that there are nutritional options in the house at all times, because as caregivers, we often forget to care for ourselves. So our role is caring for the caregivers, and we have the absolute privilege of getting to do that. When you're talking about visibility and how we do things and how we get the message out, we ask people for the gift of gab, and we hold ourselves to the highest possible standards. We don't advertise. We don't spend money on advertisement, because if we have $1 to spend, we want to spend it on the families. We want to spend it to build a house. So when you see Fisher House on TV, it's either a pro bono ad or a company that was willing to do an ad for us, but we don't spend money on that. We want to maintain a 4-star rating. We want to maintain a Give with Confidence on Charity Navigator. We have our platinum rating on GuideStar. We invite people to look at our financials and see how we do business, because we don't ever want anyone to ask a question. The only question we ask when we do this work is, what would Zachary Fisher do? How would he handle this situation? And we feel confident that that's the right thing to do, because here's a little bit of trivia for you. There are 2 non-military people that are honorary veterans of the United States military. Congress has bestowed that honor on 2 people in the history of the United States.
I don't have the tiniest idea. I was like, I'm pretty good with trivia. I don't have the tiny. So they just granted them military status because of tremendous. Obviously, it sounds like Zachary Fisher is going to be one,
Yes.
and you know what? It might be his wife would be the other. But Zachary Fisher, and I don't know.
Bob Hope.
Oh my God.
right?
Yes. Oh my God. Bob Hope. Talk about a company to be in.
Yes,
Zachary Fisher and Bob Hope are the only 2 people ever.
that's right.
Wow.
That's right. So we know that if Zachary Fisher is the standard by which we measure our actions, we're doing it right.
100%. So you think you'll retire with the Fisher House because it seems like you love thoroughly what you do. I can see I can just see the emotion in your eyes when you're like, we are making a difference. And that's what you've wanted to do your entire life. From that little girl that was like, I'm going to go in and be a teacher.
Yep.
Your story has followed the I want to make a difference your entire life.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think you'll stay with them for good? And then if so, what are your big picture goals with Fisher House? What are you looking to accomplish?
I hope so. Right now, this is absolutely perfect for me. The mission of this job is actually allowing me to live that mission in my personal life as well. When I moved back to Michigan, my dad was having some significant health issues, and my aunt and uncle were in such a situation. They never had children, so I ended up being their medical guardian. And I could not have done that without working for an organization that literally cares for caregivers. I couldn't have been a caregiver and do this work if I didn't have a supportive board, if I wasn't so passionate about this. So it allows me to do both and to have that balance. And because I'm living this, it makes me want to redouble my efforts to make sure others have the same benefit of this type of support system while they're going through a medical crisis. So, what's next? I have personal goals. I want to have a family. I know that continuing to work with the Fisher House organization would allow for that. I would love to work at the national level at some point. I don't have any intent of leaving here anytime soon. I still have family here and responsibilities here, and this is where I need to be in this season of my life. But I would like to continue this impact outside of the state at some point.
Well, your story today has absolutely blown me away. This podcast is one that I'm going to listen to multiple times, and you've dropped absolute gold on insight, on perseverance, on confidence, on going for what you want. You know what I mean? And I'm sure looking back with a lens, you have to feel a lot of pride for what you've been through and what you've gone through to make you into the woman you are today. And I'm sure there's struggles and there's pain and there's difficulty you have to overcome. But you have a beautiful story. And at the end of the day, what I've found is most of the happiest people that really get fulfillment out of this life have had a lot of ups and they've had a lot of downs. And what it is, there's beauty in both, but you have to pull the right lessons from it.
Exactly.
So,
my sister-in-law is a therapist, and they have had some just horribly traumatic things happen with them recently, and they have young children, and they've actually taken the stone labradorite as a symbol in their family, and it's exactly that. When you look at a piece of labradorite, and I've got one in my purse, I'll show you later, but it shows both light and dark. When you shine light into it, the light shines bright, but there are these sort of like cracks and crevices that are dark. And the lesson is you can't appreciate either without having both. So I've had some really ugly times that I'm not proud of, that we didn't delve into, and I'm appreciative of that here. But those things happened. I do have an amazing story. And
they might have been necessary for who you are today.
Right.
And that's a weird thing to accept. But honestly, a lot of the times the darkness is crucial in bringing out the light.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I would not be the man I am today had I not gone through the dark and the pain and the abyss and the sadness and the hopelessness and the helplessness.
Right.
They're important.
Right. And the ability to forgive. I have made choices that I'm not proud of. I have made mistakes. I have hurt people. And you can intellectually understand forgiveness, but until you actually learn the physical and emotional journey of forgiveness, not just of others, but of yourself, you can't get to that point.
And then you become a better human being, because when you see someone, you lead more with compassion.
Right.
You understand that they are going through their own struggles. They could have a lot of darkness. They could be going through times that you can't even imagine. And they're still trying to function, and they're still trying to give their best. And maybe their best at that moment in time is 3% of what their best actually is.
Yeah.
But you lead with compassion.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because you understand darkness. And you are so accurate in that. And I found that in most of my most successful friends and most of the people that live with a real radiating happiness, they've had an extreme stretch in both directions. They're not really limited people. You know, a bad day to them doesn't even register. You know what I mean? Like that, what most people would consider a bad day is not even on the scale of what a bad day actually is.
Right.
You know what I mean? So this podcast has been enlightening. And like before we had sat down to talk, I said, I don't want to know anything about my guest stories, because then everything is authentic. You have blown me away today, and it was an honor to sit here and talk with you. And you said some things that are I'm going to remember forever. Like when you said, my career has been a lot of purple. That is a beauty. I've never heard it put that way. Obviously, I know if you mix blue and red, you get purple.
Right.
But the way that you said it was so like, why are more human beings not like, hey, we're purple, and there are strong reds and blues that'll try to pull us different directions. But people need to individually consider each step and live in the purple state.
Yep.
That's
Absolutely.
genius. When you said that, I sitting across the chair. You won't see me on video, but I was like, that was good. Very, very good. And then, you know,
you know where I learned that, believe it or not? Friday nights in the Senate when I was working for Senator Biden. Because in the hallway of the Russell Building, right next to us was Strom Thurmond, who, if you don't know him, he was the senator that very famously filibustered the Civil Rights Act in 1964. 24-hour filibuster. That's that guy. Down the hall a little farther was George Allen, a Republican from Virginia. Kay Bailey Hutchison was a Republican from Texas. Right around the corner was Senator John McCain, of course, Republican from Arizona. And directly above us was Senator Ted Kennedy, a very liberal Democrat from Massachusetts. On the weekends, all of the senators would go home and they would spend the weekends, you know, in the home state or the district. But we staffers were still there on Fridays. And we would get together and socialize, you know, whether it was on Senator Kennedy's balcony or we used to go to this bar called My Brother's Place. But we would all go together, Republicans and Democrats. We actually liked each other. We had conversations. We would give each other a hard time about mistakes that we'd made throughout the week. But we made legislation better because we talk to each other.
1,000%. 1,000%. I've always thought to myself, it's almost ridiculous to create separation to the level that we do now, because it is easier to demonize someone you don't know. It's easier to dehumanize people versus when you just talk to them and you realize if they're a good person, because there are bad people in the world. There are people that do not care about others at all. There are people that are selfish to a degree that we can't even imagine, or greed or corrupt. But with that being said, if you can find good people, there's good people on both sides of the aisle. And if we get back to that and we go, okay, we both want good. We both want progress. We may not agree on what it looks like to get there, but we definitely want the conversations between us because that moves it the right direction. Why do you think things are? Let's not even go into it, because it's almost set up by design to make sure that there's as least interaction as possible.
Right. You know, I think the internet and social media that has just exacerbated the problem, because when you are forced to have a face-to-face conversation and look at somebody in the hairy eyeball, that conversation is very different than sitting in your basement trolling in text.
100%. And honestly, I'm terrified for the kids now that live in more of a virtual world, that are like, seeing masks on each other's face, and they're not interacting, and they think the world became super toxic overnight, and they're afraid of everything. And all of a sudden, remember when fear had you swerving on your scooter?
Yeah.
These children, many of them believe that, like, if I step outside and make the wrong action, I'm going to die tomorrow or kill my grandparents. They believe that. There's going to be repercussions of that. And as a society, we are better together. We are better when we talk to each other. We are better when we give each other love and compassion. We are better when we can say, I disagree with you, but I respect and value you.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And the next generation is kind of like being more divided than ever. What is that going to lead to? What is that going to look like? We need more mentors and leadership and people that are willing to say like, hey, I'm team purple here. Okay, you're welcome around me whether you're blue or red, whether you're white or black, whether you're rich or poor, whether you're religious or non-religious. You are welcome around me. If you're a good human being, there's some basic morality we have to agree on for us to be in the same circle.
Yes.
But that's where we need to head as a society. You know what I mean? And I think intuitively good people know that. We just have to put it into practice a little bit more and get off the internet. If you're a keyboard warrior, stop it. Nobody likes keyboard warriors. There's no world championship for talking shit online, right? And honestly, you're just showing to the world who you are. And if you're a shitty person, you're just screaming it every day. I guess thank you. Like I'm like, all right, that's the person.
See you coming.
Oh Jesus, I need to swerve that person.
Right.
You know what I mean? But it is unfortunate how things have got. And it's really easy, like you said, when you're not sitting across from someone and realizing like that's a human being to just be like, I hate these things. And generally, anyone that studies psychology would know that like internally how you are is kind of how you project and how you view the world. So when you're screaming online, it says more about you than about the issue you're speaking about or about the person you're talking about or any of the things that you're diving. It just says about you. You know what I mean? So, Kate, this has been one of my favorite. You're in my 92nd episode, and this is one of my favorite podcasts I've ever done. This is truly an incredible experience.
Thanks.
And, keep going. Keep going. Keep pursuing. Keep learning. Keep adjusting. Like, you were nervous before we started this podcast. I could see a little bit of this anxiousness in you crushed it. You dropped so much insight and information that can be studied and learned from and give inspiration to a young Kate Melcher that's 12 years old right now thinking like, I want to be a teacher one day or I want to make a difference. You know what I mean? That like,
Or why not both?
Or why not everything? I'm telling you what, boy, girl, rich, poor, doesn't matter. If you take personal responsibility to like, I'm going to become my best in this life. And I'm going to surround myself with good people and I'm going to learn from good people and I'm going to seek advantage and I'm going to monitor environment and I'm going to get out of condescending relationships and you can make this world your oyster. You know what I mean? And it's true. And anyone that's successful will tell you that. My story is crazy unlikely. Your story is the minority. It's incredibly unlikely. But we're just people.
Right.
And we were people that were determined. So it was an honor sitting with you today. And, if there's anything else you'd like to, I'd love you to shout out Fisher House. I'd love you to shout out if there's a website people can go to for more information, like anything you'd like to wrap this podcast up with, and then we'll end the episode.
Absolutely. I would love your listeners to visit fisherhousemichigan.org. You can follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Insta, and Twitter at FisherHouseMich. There's lots of different ways to get involved. The easiest thing is to give the gift a gab. Learn about what we do. Tell your neighbor. If you're sitting in a church pew, coaching your kid's soccer game, wherever you are, tell somebody about Fisher House because there are veterans out there that are still not getting the care that they have earned. And in Michigan, we have quality healthcare centers, regardless of what you see in the news. VA Ann Arbor, VA Detroit are premier healthcare centers where we are giving quality care to our veteran brothers and sisters. Fisher House just helps make that happen. So please visit fisherhousemichigan.org. Check us out on social media. Give us the gift of gab. And if you are so blessed and want to share those blessings, do so financially. There's a donate button on all of those sites.
Like I said, I'm almost disappointed and frustrated that I had never heard of Fisher House until today because I'm blown away by it. I want to see the place in Ann Arbor. While we were sitting talking, I was like, I want to see this. You know what I mean? Because it's such a powerful thing for us, a healthy society. So, again, thank you so much for sitting with me today.
I definitely want you to come and give yourself some grace because I was an active duty captain in the Army who didn't know what Fisher House was.
That makes me feel better. Because I've talked to so many veterans. I'm like, how have I not heard about this? Yeah. What is going on? So, no, I would love to. Maybe we'll exchange contacts and maybe a day I can drive down and see it in person and really be able to. Because witnessing something firsthand, now you have a completely different ability to articulate it to others and how important it is. So, again, we'll wrap this episode up. But thank you very much, Kate.
My pleasure. Thanks for the invitation.